In the winter of 1944, the Western Front appeared deceptively calm. The Allied forces, after the Normandy landings and the liberation of large areas of France and Belgium, were advancing steadily toward Germany. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower believed that the German army was now fragile and disorganized, incapable of launching decisive offensives. The winter promised to be difficult, with logistical challenges and slow progress, but nothing suggested a dramatic reversal of the strategic situation. The possibility of a large-scale German counterattack seemed almost unthinkable. This certainty was shattered on the morning of December 16, when Hitler launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, known today as the Battle of the Bulge. With astonishing coordination, the Germans concentrated over 200,000 men, 1,400 tanks, and thousands of artillery pieces in the dense Ardennes forest, targeting a vulnerable section of the American line. The assault overwhelmed local units, disrupted communications and supply lines, and left Allied commanders disoriented. Within hours, the offensive had thrown chaos across a wide stretch of the front, confronting Allied command with one of the gravest crises since the Normandy landings. Immediate action was required. Eisenhower summoned his top generals to Verdun on December 19, a symbolic site already renowned for its resistance during the First World War. Among those present was George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, famous for his aggressiveness and speed of action. Patton arrived ready to assess the options, while others were still trying to gauge the full extent of the threat. What set Patton apart was not audacity alone, but preparation. Though considered a quiet sector, he had always suspected that the Germans might have unexpected reserves. He had tasked his intelligence service with monitoring suspicious movements, and when reports indicated unusual activity, he took them seriously. Weeks earlier, he had devised secret plans to rapidly shift his troops northward. Thus, when the German offensive broke through the American lines, Patton already had 3 detailed plans ready for swift response. At the Verdun Conference, Eisenhower did not hide the severity of the situation. The German offensive had deeply penetrated the front, threatening to split the Allied armies. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded at Bastogne, major communication routes were falling one after another, and bad weather prevented air support. Strategic surprise was complete, and Eisenhower needed immediate decisions. When Eisenhower addressed his generals, most responded with caution. Redeploying large units in the dead of winter, over icy roads clogged with vehicles, would be an almost impossible task. Some estimated it would take days, perhaps a full week, before an effective counterattack could be launched. The atmosphere in the room was tense, marked by uncertainty and logistical concerns. Then Eisenhower fixed his gaze on Patton. "George," he asked calmly, "how long would you need to attack?" Patton did not hesitate. "I can move out with 3 divisions in 48 hours, he replied confidently, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A silence filled the room, heavy with disbelief. Some officers stared at him, wondering if he was serious or simply trying to lighten the tension. Even the experienced members of the logistics staff were stunned. Moving an entire army was not just a matter of marching. It required reorganizing traffic, redistributing supplies and fuel, positioning artillery, and coordinating hundreds of units scattered across hundreds of kilometers. Attempting all this under normal conditions would have been extraordinary. Doing it in snow, ice, and fog seemed impossible. Yet Patton was not improvising. He knew he could do it because he had prepared for this moment weeks in advance. Anticipating a possible German attack, he had tasked his staff with developing detailed plans to rapidly shift the army north. Routes, timings, priorities, everything had already been arranged. His confidence was not arrogance, but the result of meticulous planning, constant training, and a keen instinct for predicting the enemy's moves. Eisenhower studied him for a long moment. He realized that if Patton was right, the Third Army could be the only force capable of reaching Bastogne in time and preventing a disaster. Bastogne was a strategic hub. If it fell, the Germans could advance to the Meuse River and split the Allied front. The stakes were enormous. The outcome of the campaign, perhaps of the war in Western Europe, depended on rapid and decisive decisions. Finally, Eisenhower spoke firmly. "All right, George. You're cleared to go. If anyone can do it, it's you." With those words, the boldest maneuver in the European theater began. Without formalities, Patton left the conference and immediately contacted his staff, initiating the complex process of rotating the entire army 90 degrees northward. After Patton's departure, Eisenhower turned to the remaining officers. Diaries and contemporary reports reveal a mixture of astonishment and determination in his words. He described Patton's proposal as the boldest maneuver he had ever heard of during the entire war, yet also the most realistic given the circumstances. He emphasized that the general must be provided with every possible resource: fuel, priority on the roads, traffic control, and open communication channels. Eisenhower went so far as to declare, "Patton may be the key to saving the entire front," clearly signaling just how high the stakes were. At that moment, the commander recognized the unique value of Patton's leadership. It was not merely aggression. Patton knew how to turn a strategic window of opportunity into concrete action. Where others hesitated, he acted. Where others doubted, he planned. The reconfiguration of the Third Army would soon go down in history as one of the most extraordinary logistical achievements of the conflict, a symbol of speed, discipline, and flawless coordination. When Eisenhower concluded the briefing, the wheels, literally and figuratively, of the Third Army were already in motion. Convoys were being rerouted, supply trains changed course, divisions engaged in preparations in one sector were immediately redirected to a new front, through snow and ice. No modern army had ever faced such a radical redeployment in such a short time, yet within hours, Patton's headquarters was executing the plan with surgical precision. Eisenhower's words were not just encouragement, but an acknowledgement of a fundamental truth: in the most critical moments, a general with foresight and determination can attempt the impossible, and succeed. Meanwhile, the urgency of the situation was felt in every corner of the Allied command structure. The German advance showed no signs of slowing. Reports arriving at headquarters described American divisions in confused retreat or engaged in desperate defenses. Bastogne, a vital road junction in the Ardennes, was now surrounded. The 101st Airborne Division, reinforced by the 10th Armored Division, was holding against continuous attacks, but ammunition was scarce, medical supplies limited, and the cold made every effort exhausting. Without rapid intervention, the town risked falling. Patton's promise to rotate his army 90 degrees in 48 hours might have seemed audacious, even reckless, yet the general was already several steps ahead of his peers. Upon returning to headquarters, he immediately summoned his staff, issuing clear and relentless orders. Every division had to prepare for rapid movement, and the entire logistical infrastructure of the army had to be realigned to support the advance northward. Those present recalled the electric atmosphere that dominated headquarters: maps being redrawn, trucks rerouted, phones ringing incessantly, staff officers working with frenetic intensity. Patton's orchestrated transformation affected not only tactical direction but the very spirit of the troops. Soldiers accustomed to a certain sector found themselves marching toward an entirely new battlefield. Tank crews refueled and readied their machines despite freezing temperatures and slippery roads, while artillery units calculated new positions and coordinated fire with units not originally planned. The Third Army moved as a single, complex organism, capable of adapting in real time to extraordinary conditions. One of the most extraordinary aspects of the maneuver was the logistical precision that underpinned it. Patton was fully aware that even the boldest plan remained mere theory without the material capability to execute it. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medical units, and engineer battalions had to follow the advance along the new route. The army's movement was made even more complicated by the narrow, icy, and congested roads of eastern France and Luxembourg, crowded with retreating units and fleeing civilians. Yet Patton made speed the absolute priority, issuing an order that encapsulated his philosophy. Keep moving. Do not stop for any reason, unless they shoot at you, and even then keep moving. The determination to maintain momentum was at the heart of his approach to warfare. For Patton, speed was not just a tactical tool, It was a psychological weapon, capable of surprising and overwhelming the enemy before they could react. In the Ardennes, rapid movement was essential. The Germans had concentrated formidable armored forces, and their success depended on initiative. Patton knew that by moving the Third Army swiftly and striking decisively, he could disrupt German plans, liberate Bastogne, and halt the expansion of the offensive. The stakes could not have been higher. At Eisenhower's headquarters, the initial shock gave way to determination. Confidence in the Third Army commander was absolute. The success of the entire Allied strategy depended on his ability to deliver on the promise. The staff began issuing priority orders to clear the roads designated for Patton's divisions. Traffic control units were dispatched to the most critical intersections, military police monitored main routes, and supply depots were alerted to immediately redistribute materials and fuel. Eisenhower fully understood the complexity of the situation. He was not coordinating merely armies, but enormous systems requiring cooperation and synchronization among thousands of men. Despite all the support, the challenges for the Third Army were immense. The winter of 1944 to 1945 was among the harshest of recent decades. Temperatures far below freezing, heavy snowfall, and icy winds made every movement arduous. Weapons stiffened, engines struggled to start, and vehicles skidded on icy roads. Many soldiers marched through snow up to their knees, with inadequate winter gear, their breath freezing in the air. Yet, despite the hardships, morale remained remarkably high. The soldiers believed in Patton. They had witnessed his feats before and felt they could rely on his leadership even in these extreme circumstances. Columns of tanks, infantry, and support vehicles advanced relentlessly northward, while Patton maintained direct control over the operation. He demanded precise reports, issued clear orders, and visited units whenever possible, traveling the icy roads in his command jeep, accompanied by staff and escort. His presence was a symbol of strength. Soldiers remembered his determined gaze, the binoculars always at the ready, and recounted how simply seeing him made them feel capable of facing anything. One infantryman summed up the atmosphere. "When Patton passed by, it felt like we could take on the entire German army ourselves." As the Third Army advanced, Bastogne was increasingly close to collapse. The Germans continued to batter the city's perimeter, probing for any weakness. The defenders of the 101st Airborne Division, though determined, were running low on resources. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander, responded to the German demand for surrender with the famous "Nuts!" But fighting spirit could not replace dwindling ammunition, especially for the artillery units, essential for repelling attacks. Medical stations were overwhelmed, and the wounded suffered in the relentless cold. Every hour weighed like a stone. Patton's gamble was simple, yet extreme: reach Bastogne before the city fell. To do so, the divisions had to move at an unrelenting pace. On December 21st and 22nd, the first contacts along the northern roads of Luxembourg confirmed that the 90-degree rotation had been successfully completed. The lead units immediately engaged the Germans, surprising them repeatedly. The speed of the American advance exceeded all enemy expectations, as the Germans still struggled to adjust their defenses, unaware that a large army was converging behind them. The 4th Armored Division and other spearhead units faced fierce fighting, but the favorable moment was on their side. Every mile gained brought them closer to Bastogne, every hour gained increased the chance of breaking the encirclement. Pressure on the German forces grew, forcing them to redistribute resources and halt their advance toward the Meuse River. Constantly updated, Eisenhower watched Patton's gamble transform into an operational success. What had seemed impossible just days before, turning a crisis into an opportunity for a decisive counterattack, was becoming reality. The confidence Eisenhower had placed in Patton was now fully justified. It was not just a matter of numbers, but the ability of a single army to accomplish an extraordinary feat. On Christmas Eve, Patton's troops were on the doorstep of the besieged town. The combination of speed, aggressiveness, and determination of the Third Army had brought them to the brink of one of the most celebrated relief operations in military history. Everything was ready for December 26th, when the first units would reach Bastogne and finally break the encirclement. On December 25th, the battlefield was a race against time, between exhaustion and indomitable will. Tanks and infantry advanced over icy roads, wooded ridges, and fortified German positions. Realizing the threat on their southern flank, German commanders redeployed units initially assigned to the advance toward the Meuse to block the American approach. Bastogne was the focal point of the struggle. If the Third Army arrived in time, the siege would collapse, and the German offensive would lose all momentum. Every hour was a contest of endurance, pressure, and sheer determination. Patton, however, did not slow his pace for a single moment. He pressed his commanders relentlessly, reminding them that Bastogne was not a symbolic target, but a vital strategic hub. If the city fell, the Germans could regain the initiative and prolong the offensive, making the winter even more costly for the Allies. Patton's determination was evident even in his Christmas prayer, a few days earlier, in which he asked for better weather so the Third Army could receive air support. Legend has it that shortly afterward, the skies did indeed clear, allowing Allied aircraft to provide crucial assistance. December 26 brought the decisive moment. After days of fierce fighting, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through the German lines and approached the southern edge of Bastogne. Around 4:50 p.m., a small patrol led by Lieutenant Charles Bogus of Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, made contact with the defenders of the 101st Airborne Division. The encounter, modest in scale, involving only a few tanks and infantry, carried enormous symbolic weight. The encirclement of Bastogne had been broken. Soldiers who had endured bombardments, relentless artillery fire, freezing temperatures, and scarce supplies were finally linked to the rest of the Allied forces. When the news reached Patton, his reaction was measured, no celebration, only a quiet acknowledgement of duty fulfilled. "A man must do his best," he said, with the understated tone typical of someone who acts boldly. He knew that the first relief did not mean the end of the battle. The Germans still held strong positions around Bastogne, and the Third Army had to consolidate the corridor, protect supply lines, and repel any attempt by the enemy to re-establish the encirclement. Fighting would continue for weeks, but the psychological moment had been achieved. The initiative was firmly returning to the Allies. At Eisenhower's headquarters, the relief was immense. The calculated risk of entrusting Patton with the command of such a rapid and complex maneuver had borne extraordinary fruit. Many officers had doubted the feasibility of the operation, fearing that confidence in Patton might exceed logistical reality. Yet the Third Army had completed the 90-degree rotation, marched through the harshest winter, engaged moving German units, and reached Bastogne on schedule. Eisenhower's observation, "If anyone can do it, Patton can," now seemed almost prophetic. Diaries and staff recollections testified to the genuine admiration for the general's operational clarity and his willingness to embrace bold solutions. Eisenhower understood that in times of crisis, conventional thinking was not enough. It required a commander capable of decisive action, mobilizing an entire army with speed and cohesion. Patton had once again demonstrated that rare combination of insight, preparation, and audacity, considered by many military historians one of the most brilliant operations of the war. Meanwhile, German leadership watched their plans crumble. The failure to capture Bastogne and the arrival of Patton's troops had disrupted their operational timetable. Fuel shortages, logistical problems, and constant pressure from the north and south were wearing down the armored units that had initially achieved success. The massive German offensive, which had overrun the American lines, was now bogged down by Allied resistance and counterattacks. Hitler's grand plan to divide the Allies and force a negotiated peace was collapsing. The Allies regained control of key communication routes, restoring coordinated operations across the front. For Patton, the liberation of Bastogne represented more than a tactical victory. It was the fulfillment of a commander's duty. His proactive planning, begun weeks earlier, allowed him to respond with unmatched speed. His constant presence, careful supervision, and insistence on aggressive action galvanized the troops. The Third Army had transformed what could have been a catastrophic defeat into a strategic opportunity, demonstrating that audacity, preparation, and decisiveness could turn the tide of an entire campaign. The impact of Patton's actions was felt far beyond the battlefield. Among the Allied troops, his lightning-fast maneuver became a tangible symbol of resilience and determination. Soldiers who just days earlier had felt isolated and overwhelmed by the German advance realized they were part of an army capable of reacting with speed and decisiveness. Patton's legend, already formidable, was further cemented. His ability to impose his will on both his own forces and the enemy became part of the mythology of the European campaign. The strategic consequences of the liberation of Bastogne were profound. The German offensive, worn down by fuel shortages, logistical difficulties, and relentless counterattacks, came to a halt. By January 1945, the Allies had regained nearly all the ground lost during the initial advance. Hitler's last gamble in the West ended not only with a tactical defeat, but with a true strategic collapse. The path to the Rhine, and ultimately to the heart of Germany, lay open without any significant obstacles. Eisenhower later recognized how decisive Patton's decisions had been in turning the tide of the campaign. The speed with which an entire army completed a 90-degree rotation was unprecedented in modern warfare. Patton's confidence also reinvigorated the morale of Allied forces precisely when discouragement could have prevailed. Eisenhower's praise, coming from a man known for his measured and cautious demeanor, carried particular weight. Patton's maneuver was a masterpiece. It changed the course of the battle and perhaps the war, he told his staff. Today, historians consider the Third Army's 90-degree rotation a paradigmatic example of operational excellence. Its success did not come from improvisation or mere instinct, but from a combination of preparation, disciplined command, flawless logistics, and bold leadership. Patton's deep understanding of mobility, momentum, and the psychological effects of combat allowed him to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. The famous exchange between Eisenhower and Patton, "How soon can you attack?" 48 hours, remains one of the most iconic moments of World War II. It encapsulates the synergy between two different but complementary leaders, Eisenhower, a strategist of complex coalitions, and Patton, a tireless warrior whose speed and audacity made the liberation of Bastogne possible. The Supreme Commander's trust and the results achieved testified to the power of resolute leadership in times of crisis. The liberation of Bastogne is today remembered as one of the most emblematic achievements of the Allied campaign in Europe. It represents resilience, sacrifice, and the capacity for decisive action under extreme conditions. At the center of this story is George S. Patton, whose ability to rotate an entire army in the middle of winter and bring it to the gates of a besieged town in just 48 hours continues to be studied, admired, and celebrated. It was this extraordinary demonstration of military genius that prompted Eisenhower to utter words history has never forgotten. If anyone could do the impossible, it was Patton. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. See you in the next video.